Nigeria just pulled the trigger on its boldest move yet, a radar wall to seal every inch of its skies. From cheap drones buzzing oil fields to mysterious aircraft circling near the presidential villa, the nation finally says, enough. But here's the paradox. Africa's giant tolerated blind skies for decades, letting smugglers and saboteurs slip through. And suddenly, now it wants total coverage, total control. Why wait until the danger was this obvious? And the twist? This is no ordinary arms deal. Europe pitches NATO-tested reliability. China dangles independence with research labs and training. In the middle stands Nigeria, demanding both. While echoing the same sovereignty gospel Ibrahim Traoré preaches across the Sahel. Before we go deeper, where are you watching from? Drop your city, your flag, and tell us, when it comes to protection, do you trust outside guarantees or do you prefer to build your own shield? Welcome to Africa Daily. Good news. A channel where African stories are told with clarity, irony, and a human pulse. Whether you're tuning in from New York, Lagos, or Paris, this space is for you because sovereignty isn't just a headline. It's a daily choice, and it shapes how we all live. And after that, let's step right into the first chapter of this story. How Nigeria's leap from patchy radars to a nationwide shield became not just a defense project, but a declaration of intent. Nigeria did something it had never done before. It declared the sky itself a battlefield. For decades, its borders were policed on land and at sea, while the air above was treated like an afterthought. Smugglers knew this. Insurgents exploited it, and ordinary Nigerians learned to live with the quiet fear that something could appear overhead without warning. Then, suddenly, Abuja announced a project that sounded almost impossible in scale. The military total radar coverage of Nigeria. Not a patch, not a pilot program, but a blanket. A seamless shield meant to cover 900,000 square kilometers of sky. This decision didn't come from nowhere. Officials described it as revolutionary, a reset of national defense, but the truth is less glamorous. The skies had been leaking for years. Reports of drones hovering near oil pipelines, unidentified aircraft circling above the presidential villa, even smugglers flying contraband across porous borders. Each incident chipped away at trust. And after that, one question grew louder. If the government can't see the skies, can it really claim sovereignty? Observers across Africa called the announcement bold. Yet there was also irony. Nigeria, the continent's largest economy, is only now racing to do what smaller states like Rwanda attempted years earlier on a limited scale. It's as if the giant woke up late, but when it did, it refused to walk. It started running. Maybe that's how nations move, slow to change, then abrupt, like a switch flipped overnight. For the average citizen, this shift feels personal. Imagine sitting in Lagos traffic, glancing up as a drone passes overhead. Before, that meant uncertainty. Was it harmless or was it a threat no one could stop? Now, the promise is different. Radar eyes watching, ready to detect and respond. It's a change in psychology as much as in defense. People adapt to vulnerability when they must, but once protection is visible, expectations rise. Americans know this well. Most don't think about airspace at all, precisely because they assume it is already secure. Nigerians are only beginning to taste that same assurance. And within this transformation lies a subtle twist. Nigeria isn't just buying machines, it is buying dignity. Sovereignty in the 21st century isn't about flags or anthems alone, it's about unseen systems that keep nations safe in silence. The paradox is simple. When security works, nobody notices, until the day it doesn't. The story of MTR, as it is now called, is not simply about radars or screens in dark control rooms. It is about a government telling its people, we will see what once slipped past us. But promises on paper are fragile. The real test is how, and with whom, Nigeria will build this shield. That question, the who and the how, is where the drama intensifies and where the world's biggest players begin to circle. For years, Nigeria's skies were full of holes, and those holes weren't abstract. They became highways for smugglers flying drugs and weapons, corridors for insurgent drones spying on villages, even opened doors for unidentified aircraft circling near the presidential villa itself. Imagine that, the symbolic heart of government exposed from above. If the roof over the president's head looked vulnerable, what chance did oil rigs in the Delta or bases in the Northeast really have? Officials tried to downplay it at the time, but ordinary people noticed. Parents in the North whispered about drones buzzing over fields at night. In the South, oil workers joked grimly that the rigs were easier to attack than to repair. One civil servant later recalled the moment he saw radar footage of an unidentified aircraft loitering near Abuja and thought, if we can't even see who's watching us, do we really control this country? It wasn't just fear, it was humiliation. The irony is sharp. Nigeria owned jets, missiles, and soldiers. Yet its biggest weakness was invisibility. It could shoot, but it could not see. And after that, every gap in radar coverage became an invitation. Criminal groups learned to time their flights. Insurgents realized they could use cheap commercial drones the way a teenager in America uses a gaming console: low cost, fast, and endlessly replaceable. That's when the balance of power flipped. High-tech didn't always mean expensive. Sometimes it meant clever. Here's the twist inside the twist. Nigeria wasn't just behind in equipment, it was behind in mindset. Its defenses were relics: Roland II, Shilka, designed for an age when threats moved slow, loud, and obvious. But the 21st century doesn't attack that way. A missile can skim low across the horizon. A swarm of drones can overwhelm radar, and electronic interference can blind an outdated system. It's like trying to protect your home with a lock from the 1970s while burglars carry Wi-Fi jammers. Americans often assume their alarms are modern. Nigerians had to accept theirs were already obsolete. Human behavior tells us something here. When people grow up with vulnerability, they adapt. They normalize it. According to surveys in conflict zones, most families eventually stop reporting aerial sightings because they believe nothing will change. And yet, when security finally arrives, expectations reset overnight. Think of how Americans reacted after 9/11. Suddenly, every passenger line, every bag check, every beep at the scanner mattered. Nigeria is on the edge of that same transformation now. Consider one short story. A farmer near Maiduguri described watching an unknown drone hover above his field during planting season. He said it stayed long enough that his children refused to go outside. A week later, a military patrol admitted they had no radar record of it. That small moment captures the larger failure, when citizens lose faith that their state even sees what they see. This is why urgency grew unbearable. Each unanswered incident was not just a tactical risk, it was a public reminder that sovereignty had holes. The decision to launch total radar coverage wasn't simply bold, it was inevitable. And yet, announcing the when still left the how. Who would build it? Which partners would Nigeria trust? And which vision, Western reliability or Eastern autonomy, would shape the country's future in the skies? When Nigeria opened the door for bids, the world's defense giants didn't walk in. They rushed. 4 names, each carrying its own philosophy, lined up to pitch a future for Africa's biggest economy. And the irony? For once, Nigeria wasn't begging. It was dictating the terms. Italy's Leonardo arrived with pedigree. Radars able to track hundreds of airborne targets at once, hardened against electronic interference. The pitch was simple: trust NATO-tested resilience. Germany's Rheinmetall countered with its Skyguard system, a layered defense designed to plug straight into Nigeria's own industry through ammunition partnerships. Spain's Indra stepped in with a hybrid offer: surveillance for both military skies and civil aviation, promising Nigeria could dominate defense and air traffic management in one sweep. And then came China's NORINCO, presenting not just radars, but the promise of a research and maintenance center inside Nigeria itself, complete with training for local engineers. Here's where the story twists again. This wasn't just a technology auction, it was a battle of philosophies. Europe sold reliability, China sold autonomy. Nigeria, for the first time, demanded both. Think about that shift. A nation once treated like a customer, now behaving like a negotiator. In human terms, it's the same as moving from tenant to homeowner, Once you own the walls, you stop asking permission to hang your pictures. For Nigerians, this change matters deeply. One official recalled how, in the past, contracts meant waiting weeks for spare parts from Europe while systems sat idle. People lost faith not because the technology was weak, but because dependency made it fragile. If you're American, imagine calling 911 and hearing the response, "We'll need to import the equipment first." That's what dependency feels like. And yet, there's another subtle twist. Each bidder isn't just selling Nigeria hardware, they're selling an identity. Leonardo's NATO brand whispers alignment with Europe's traditional power structure. Rheinmetall hints at industrial partnership, a lure to Nigeria's ambition of becoming a defense producer itself. Indra tempts with dual use, security and commerce tied together. NORINCO goes further, promising knowledge transfer, the ability to fix and upgrade without foreign permission. The choice isn't only about defending the skies, it's about what kind of future Nigeria imagines for itself. There's a human analogy here. People in America often choose between convenience and independence, order from a delivery app or cook at home. One saves time, the other builds skill. Nations make the same choices, only the stakes are measured in sovereignty. Nigeria's radar contest forces the same question. Do you prefer to borrow security, or do you insist on learning it for yourself, even if it's slower, harder, riskier? A short story from the Defense Ministry captures this moment. A Nigerian officer described standing in front of foreign contractors, listening to polished pitches, and realizing that for once he held the leverage. "We told them," he said, "no local training, no deal." That single line shows the reversal. Power shifting from seller to buyer. Dependency bending toward autonomy. This competition, however, isn't over gadgets. It is over who Nigeria will trust in the years ahead, and whose fingerprints will shape the continent's skies. And as the contest heats up, the questions stretch beyond radar screens and contracts, into the realm of geopolitics, alliances, and the philosophy of sovereignty itself. So let me ask you, if you were at that table in Abuja, which side would you choose? The comfortable path of outside reliability, or the harder path of independence that demands sweat and risk? Share your thoughts below, because Nigeria's decision might echo across the entire Sahel. The strangest part of Nigeria's radar story is that it isn't really about radar at all. It's about philosophy. Two competing models of security that reveal how nations see themselves. Europe offers NATO-tested reliability, but with strings attached. China offers autonomy and training, but with geopolitical shadows. And Nigeria stands in the middle, asking for both, as if history finally gave it leverage to demand more. This is the paradox. For decades, African states were passive buyers. A contract meant equipment on paper, dependency in practice. Spare parts shipped from abroad, updates controlled overseas, engineers flown in at extra cost. Sovereignty became theater. The flag waved, but the switch stayed in foreign hands. And suddenly, Abuja insists, no local training, no deal. That single sentence flipped decades of tradition. Here's where the human side cuts deeper. Most people know the difference between renting and owning. When you rent, you adapt to the landlord's rules. When you own, you decide when to paint, when to repair, when to expand. Nations are no different. Nigerians once waited for permission to maintain their skies. Now they want to fix them with their own hands. For Americans, it's like the difference between buying your own home security system versus paying a company that locks you into a contract for life. One feels safe but dependent, the other risky but empowering. And there's another twist inside this choice. Europe's model guarantees stability, but it also locks Nigeria into service contracts that last decades, keeping foreign technicians on speed dial. China's NORINCO promises knowledge transfer and local labs, but it also ties Abuja closer to Beijing's orbit, with all the strategic baggage that carries. It's the kind of dilemma most individuals face in daily life. Do you prefer the convenience of outsourcing, or the sweat of learning a skill you'll own forever? Kangui Nu Kate almost always chooses convenience, until the day dependency stings too much. One Nigerian officer told a revealing story. Years ago, he watched a critical system go offline because a foreign part hadn't arrived. For weeks, the radar sat dark. "We had the base, the soldiers, the airfield," he said, "but we were blind." That memory haunted him. When NORINCO promised to train engineers locally, he admitted, "I wanted it yesterday." This is not just about pride, it's about survival stitched into memory. The shift matters for Africa beyond Nigeria. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré built his reputation by declaring the end of dependency, rejecting French tutelage in favor of sovereignty. Abuja doesn't shout like Traoré, but its radar demands whisper the same message. Sovereignty is not negotiable anymore. The echo is unmistakable. And here's the question for the audience. If you were in that position, which risk would you take? Would you prefer the comfort of foreign reliability, even if it means decades of contracts? Or would you gamble on independence, knowing mistakes will be your own? Most Americans rarely face this choice in security. Nigerians live it daily. Nigeria's decision isn't final yet, but the philosophies are clear. And as the bids circle tighter, the stakes are no longer technical. They are about what kind of future Africa will accept. The next chapter isn't about equipment specs. It's about geography, scale, and whether this shield can stretch far enough to cover a nation of 200 million. The real enemy of Nigeria's radar plan isn't insurgents or smugglers, it's geography. Covering nearly 1 million square kilometers from the crowded streets of Lagos to the desert fringe of Borno is like trying to watch every block in New York, every cornfield in Iowa, and every canyon in Arizona all at once. One radar station here or there might look impressive on a map, but in reality it leaves seams, and seams are where threats slip through. That is why the Military Total Radar Coverage Project demands a network, not scattered dots. Fixed and mobile stations linked together, overlapping layers feeding into command centers that process threats in seconds. It sounds clinical, but think of it this way. People rarely trust a single lock on the front door. We add deadbolts, cameras, sensors, not because one isn't useful, but because layers make us feel safe. A nation's sky works the same way. Here's the twist buried inside. The more technology Nigeria adds, the more it admits how blind it once was. For years, insurgents in the Northeast tested drones that cost less than a laptop. Smugglers in the Delta used small planes to ferry weapons and stolen oil just below detection altitude. Each low-tech innovation exposed a high-tech weakness, and after that, the math turned humiliating. Billion-dollar budgets undone by aircraft anyone could buy online. Human psychology reacts in predictable ways. When people grow up with blind spots, they normalize them. Many Nigerians learned to shrug off unidentified aircraft, the same way most Americans walk past security cameras without noticing. They assume someone else is watching. But when that someone else fails, habits change. People look up more, they worry more, and trust in the state erodes quietly but deeply. A story from the Niger Delta captures this shift. An oil worker recalled a night when a low-flying plane buzzed the rigs. "We didn't know if it was smugglers or worse," he said. Hours later, the Air Force admitted their radar had seen nothing at all. That single gap in coverage turned fear into a ritual. Workers began scanning the horizon themselves because they no longer believed the state could. This is why geography matters. Without overlapping coverage, the size of Nigeria itself becomes an accomplice to its enemies. And yet, if the shield truly closes, the scale flips from weakness to strength, turning Nigeria's vastness into a deterrent of its own. The question now is whether this system can protect not just a nation, but a region, a question that pulls the story into its next, bigger frame. The strangest ripple of Nigeria's radar project is that its reach may not stop at Nigeria's borders. A shield built for one nation could become the backbone of an entire region. And that possibility changes the map of West Africa more than any speech or summit. Smugglers don't respect borders. Insurgent groups fly across them. Even drones and light aircraft ignore lines drawn on a map. A radar system that sees into the sky above Lagos, or Maiduguri, inevitably notices what crosses into Niger, Chad, or Ghana. And here's the irony. One nation's sovereignty can suddenly become everyone's early warning system. Abuja may have started with national pride, but what it built could pressure neighbors to connect or be left exposed. Think of how people behave with neighborhood security cameras. At first, only one homeowner installs them. Soon, others realize the benefits and join in, partly for safety, partly because not joining makes them look careless. According to studies in American suburbs, adoption spreads fastest when fear and peer pressure mix. The same social dynamic now plays out at the level of states. Here comes the twist. For decades, Africa's airspace was policed by outsiders. French jets in the Sahel, American drones watching the Gulf of Guinea. Dependence became routine, even convenient. But the more Nigeria's radar takes shape, the more it exposes that routine as weakness. If one African nation can track and respond on its own, why can't others? The burden quietly shifts from asking outsiders for cover to asking neighbors for cooperation. A short story brings this closer. A Ghanaian pilot recalled crossing into Nigeria's skies during a training exercise. "In the past, we'd joke that nobody noticed," he said. "Now, before we landed, Abuja already called." That single phone call revealed a transformation. The unseen had become visible, and with visibility came accountability. The human element matters here. Most Americans rarely think about who watches their skies. They assume the FAA, NORAD, and satellites keep things safe. In West Africa, that assumption never existed. Now, for the first time, it might. If Nigeria chooses to share data, neighbors could gain real-time alerts against incursions, piracy support flights, or drone smuggling. If it doesn't, pressure builds anyway. A shield that covers one house always changes the street, and the paradox deepens. The very size of Nigeria, once its biggest vulnerability, could become a regional asset. What was once open sky for intruders could evolve into the nucleus of a collective defense grid. The question isn't just whether Nigeria can protect itself, it's whether its neighbors are ready to live under a shared sky designed in Abuja. This is where the radar story stops being about machines and starts being about trust. And after all, trust is the hardest technology to engineer. But if the project succeeds, it could redefine sovereignty in the air, not as something outsourced to Paris or Washington, but as something owned, shared, and grown in Africa itself. So let me ask you directly, would you feel safer knowing your skies were guarded by outsiders or by neighbors who finally decided to watch together? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because Nigeria's choice may decide not just its future, but the region's. The paradox of Nigeria's radar shield is that its success will be invisible. If the system works, planes won't fall, oil rigs won't burn, drones won't buzz above homes, and people may forget it exists at all. But invisibility in this case is the ultimate proof of strength. The real measure of sovereignty isn't the flag waving in daylight, it's the silent technology protecting you at night. And here lies the twist. For years, headlines about Nigeria's skies were about intrusions, weaknesses, and unanswered questions. Now the story flips. A giant once mocked for gaps is daring to build one of Africa's most ambitious defense systems. It is a reminder that sovereignty in the 21st century is rarely won with speeches. It's earned in control rooms, coded in radars, and tested by crises the public may never see. Think of how ordinary people change after security arrives. Before, they adapt. They normalize fear. After, they expect more, sometimes even take it for granted. Studies in the US show that most Americans rarely think about who protects their skies. NORAD is a ghost in the background. Nigerians could be entering that same era when the absence of fear becomes routine. That shift in psychology may be as powerful as the radars themselves. A story from Abuja captures it well. A civil servant admitted he used to flinch whenever reports of unidentified aircraft surfaced. "Now," he said, "I imagine a screen lighting up in a command room before I even hear the news." It's not proof the system already works, but it shows something deeper. Belief that the state can see. And belief, once lost, is harder to rebuild than any radar tower. The bigger twist is geopolitical. By demanding training, by negotiating with Europe and China on its own terms, Nigeria showed that Africa doesn't need to accept dependency as destiny. Captain Ibrahim Traoré shouted that message from Ouagadougou. Abuja answered quietly, but with billions on the line. Different voices, same chorus, sovereignty. So what happens next? Maybe the shield becomes purely national. Maybe it grows into a regional spine. Or maybe it stumbles, exposing new cracks. Whatever the outcome, Nigeria has already changed the rules. It moved from customer to negotiator, from blind spots to a vision of control. That transition alone marks a turning point in Africa's defense story. And here's where you come in. What would you choose if the decision was yours? Comfort in foreign guarantees or the hard road of independence built piece by piece? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, because sovereignty is not just an African question, it's a human one. If you found this breakdown meaningful, stay with us. Subscribe to Africa Daily. Good news. Share this video and let others join the conversation. Because tomorrow's headline isn't written yet, but together we can see it coming.